talk about the solution, about the roadmap, and really kind of get into it a little bit more. Um, you know, we will record this, so if there's something that you want to double click on, we can definitely do that. Also, if you have questions, feel free to engage. This is meant to be informative. As most of you know, we're pretty informal group, and we like to keep it that way. So we're fortunate to have Garrett Rowe with us today. Most of you have met Garrett, and he'll kind of take you through NeuralSeek. And again, this is an opportunity to learn and engage. So please ask questions as we go here. Garrett, thanks for taking the time today.
Sure, absolutely. Let me get things fired up here.
Of course.
And we'll kick it off.
And please, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or utilize the chat functionality. I'll be monitoring that as we go here.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get kicked off here. Okay, I'm going to put up some slides just as a backdrop as we start talking about this. And by all means, put up hands, stop me if you want me to dive into other things. But I'm going to kind of start at the beginning. Essentially the beginning of why we built this, and where we were going from it, and where we're headed to from today. So if you flash back, this whole process started about a year ago, right? When we first launched a product that we aimed to try to drive down the cost of doing virtual agents. So I, before that, led pre-sales engineering for IBM for about a decade, specifically around what became the IBM Watson stack, right? Started off early, matured over the years, and then became the thing it was, as I led that organization. And one of the biggest things that always came up is it was easy to show these chatbots, these virtual agents early on, but very hard to live with them, right? Because yes, they took time and effort away from answering end customer questions, but they required lots of work to get working right? So you had to put tons of time and effort into predicting the questions that people would ask you. You had to put tons of time and effort into maintaining that virtual agent after you started, because there was this inevitable drift of conversations from what you thought people were going to ask the virtual agent to what they actually started asking. And then you as a content, right, or you as an organization, the things that you do are going to change, right? So as soon as you make a shift in bringing on a new product, changing the metrics, the pricing, anything about your product, your virtual agent almost immediately became out of date and just became a hassle to try to update. I've got to get another services organization in here to maintain this thing. It's too hard for me to maintain. And essentially, for a lot of folks, virtual agents became a hassle. So we had sat down, this time last year, a little bit before this, and thought, how can we do this thing better, right? What technology exists that we can bring together, fill in the gaps, and make a solution that works for this a little bit easier? And we came up with, back then, generative AI. It was okay, right? It provided a little bit of value. It required tons of guardrail, right? So we started together with a solution that was backed by generative AI, but mainly tried to reduce the build cost at that time of virtual agents. And so we launched that end of the summer, started rolling with first clients, August, September timeframe. And then, December hit with, ChatGPT launching. And then things just went vertical from there. And so today we've got somewhere about 550 customers, either piloting, POCing, or using us live in production. So a huge increase in uptake in this sort of methodology. And it's really proven back that what we had thought about, a year before is a path that a lot of people understand, and it resonates with them. I was on this morning with a German multinational technology company, talking with them about how to bridge the gap between how they answer questions today, right? And because they're a deep technology company, they could spend 20 minutes on on one question with a customer, right? Mapping back to unpacking what they're asking, looking it up in the documentation, forming a comprehensive answer, doing a little bit of back and forth with the customer and delivering that answer. So if you think of like the cost it takes for every question to take a half an hour of a reasonable expert's time to answer, there's tons of cost savings to be had with that. And that's just sort of scratching the surface of, okay, well, now if I've reclaimed that time and I refocus these people on, instead of spending the time answering the same or similar questions to customers, what if I turn those people into building better content, right? So taking them back to say, what do I have documentation on my products and services? How well am I able to answer these questions? What goes into that, right? So with those, freeing up that time, using a smaller group of people that are more focused to build better content, the whole solution just stitches together. So we're going to play with this today, see what it is that NeuralSeek does, why it does it, and where we're going from here. So again, feel free to jump in with any questions, but I'm going to start off with a little demo, and then we'll unpack that demo, what was going on behind the scenes, how it's being used, why it's being used. So let me move a few things out of the way here. So I've got, if I can bring it up, a IBM web page here. And so this is the IBM Analytics website, or a version of it that I've captured. And behind the scenes, I've got a knowledge base that knows everything about IBM Analytics. So it's got about 3,000 pages of documentation specifically in these areas. And I'm going to use it to dynamically generate answers. Right? So this virtual agent, again, wants an assistant here. Doesn't have a lot pre-programmed. It's got about nothing for answers pre-programmed. Everything I'm going to be doing is going to be following through to NeuralSeek, which is going to expand the question that I send to it, mine the knowledge base of those 3,000 web pages for topical information, come back, form answers, send them up, and then on the back end, help group, rank, and stack those things for the knowledge workers, which will improve those questions later on. So I'm going to start off with a, possibly a complicated question here. Why do I need data fabric, and who can provide that to my organization? And let me make this a little bit bigger. So again, nothing pre-canned with this, right? This went to language generation, came back and made me a comprehensive answer. And with it, because I built this off of a web scrape, it knows where it found that information from. So I can surface relevant links that might talk to the subject matter at hand so people can get more information. Now, we can do dynamic translation of these things into any language, right? Because as we've implemented these generative AI pieces, it allows for a much easier movement, right, of back and forth from different languages, across languages. I can handle these a lot better than used to be because of those metrics. Now, the other thing that NeuralSeek does is it allows for context to be carried. And context is difficult sometimes, right? So I could ask a question like this: how can I reduce compliance risk around KYC, right? So KYC in the IBM context for analytics is probably know your customer, right? Of banking regulations that go into data protection and other areas like that. So from that, we'd expect the answer to be somewhat topical around KYC, potentially linking back to a product and service IBM does. And so, yeah, we found KYC. We tied it automatically to anti-money laundering, which is really what we're talking about here, and then tie it back a little bit to IBM. Now, we can ask a follow-on question like, how much effort does that take? Right, so something a little bit nebulous. I don't know exactly, what I'm going to be asking. The system understands context and where it comes from, and is able to carry that context along in the system, even if the user isn't specific about what they're asking for. So in this case, it knows I'm talking about KYC, even though I didn't mention it, right? And yeah, it is a tough question, right? It depends on your organization, how difficult that might be. So the ability to move across phases of the conversation remember where we came from, because again, we're driving all of this back to content that exists inside of the corporate knowledge base. And we're not basing it off of just a language model, right? If we just based it off a language model, it wouldn't have that corporate context. So we have to fuse those things together to get an answer like this. The other thing that we do is dynamic personalization. And so let me give you a little example of that. I'm going to sign on with a little single sign-on mock-up that I have here. So at this point, the system is going to know who I am. And in the context of IBM, it knows a little bit about my history, knows a few of the products that I know or possibly have purchased. And so now when I come in and I ask a question like, is it easy to implement data masking? I would expect the system might tailor this a little bit better towards me. So we can use the information it knows about me to make an answer that seems like the system is talking directly to me, as if a human was. And, so with this, right, we get an answer back. It recognizes me. It recognizes, some of the areas. Well, back in IBM, I used to lead what used to be called InfoSphere. And so it offered up an InfoSphere product to me, right? Tailoring the conversation directly to me and with no work really from the back end. The way you'd set this up in a normal system is whatever CRM that you had controlling your customer experience, you could pull directly from that, feed in interactions that the customer has had. We have some customers today using this for customer journeying, right? So as you've tracked a customer moving across pages of the website and building that experience with you, you can tie this personalization directly back into the user journey across the site. You can say, hey, I can see that you were interested in this sales page or this product, right? And spent time there. And then use that dynamically in the bot to reaffirm the conversation with the person. Again, each of these you'll have to use specifically to branding, right? Because you don't want it to come across as creepy, right? Some people you don't want to know to tell that you know these things about them, but it's definitely possible with the technology. Another one I like to do is come in with a completely different language. So I'm going to ask a question here in Indonesian about data masking. And you can have the system set up to identify language on the inbound, right? So in the world, there's something 100 odd languages, right? The system, if you allow it to, will identify languages dynamically and then try to unpack the question and then answer back in the language it found. So again, pretty powerful stuff that really doesn't require a lot of setup on the inbound. Now, if I look at the back end here, and I unpack a question that I asked earlier, and we can go into the back. So this is the back end of NeuralSeek. And so this is where a content manager would live, so a knowledge worker, someone that's in charge of these pieces. Now, as questions come in, everything that flows through the system ends up here, right? So I can look at what these questions are. I can see how we answered them, the dynamic areas that came through them. If I come in and click on one of these questions, I can edit an answer here. And as I edit an answer, I'm essentially telling the system, I want to use this answer now as training for answering any future questions in this subject matter area, right? So you can quickly tune the back end to this is the style and the content that I want to see out of an answer like this, right? And if I don't like an answer, I can remove it. I can come through and see, okay, I've answered this question a few different varieties, right? Maybe I just want to get rid of a few of these. And I'm going to focus down on those. With anything like here, I can come in and see exactly the source of where I got this answer. So I'm going to come into the Seek tab here. And this is sort of the magic of the generative AI. And what NeuralSeek does is provides for answer provenance, right? So I've turned on highlighting here, and it'll tell us exactly how it stitched that answer together from the source documentation. And you can see in this case, it generated most of the answer, a very meaty amount from a single document, right? This top one. I can click out to the document. I can see where I got that from. And most importantly, I can see the match score. And we do what's called semantic matching, right? So we look at how much of the subject matter was taken from ideally single sources and used in context, because that helps us prove that the intent and the meaning of the source documentation came up through to the answer. Now, you'll see a lot of times these days that people talk about what's called hallucination. You may have heard the term in the news. And especially on an early days in generative AI, hallucination was bad, right? You would ask a question up through generative AI, and you'll get a really pretty answer that is completely meaningless. Like everything about it's fake, right? But it sounds good. How do we actually utilize this in business? Because I can't use fake answers, for business. You can't align your brand with that sort of thing. So semantic match is one of the ways that we use to prove and trust in the system, right? So it will tell us if I have a high semantic match, I most likely have a very high matching between the generative answer and the sources that it came from. So I've most likely captured the meaning correctly across them. Versus I could ask a question like, why is the sky blue? And the model may generate an answer for that, but the semantic match score will be really low because IBM doesn't know anything about why the sky is blue. It's not something a product and service they sell. So you can see in this case, it found some words right from the source documentation. IBM uses blue a lot. It's the corporate color. But the semantic match score is only 6%, saying, hey, don't put really any trust at all in this answer, because from a corporate context, it's as good as a hallucination. I have no trust in this answer whatsoever. So NeuralSeek allows the ability to just remove answers like this. So we can either give warnings or we can block entirely answering questions that are below a certain set threshold. So typically a company might set 10 or 15% as their minimum confidence, and that will block the chat bot from talking about things that they don't sell or they don't service or doesn't do their brand any good. You may see chatbots out there that just talk about the weather. And if I'm trying to sell IBM Analytics products, talking about the weather doesn't help me, right? It just costs me money to do it. So I can get rid of those things. And likewise, above a certain threshold, I may want to give a warning, right? So if, let's say I had an answer that was like 20%, but it could be somewhat topical. So I could say, hey, I'm not an expert in the subject matter, but I'm going to try to answer your question for you. Because it's been definitely proven on the customer service side, the more times you can give an answer to a person's question, the more likely they are to stick with the brand and continue trying, right? It's if you consistently say, I don't know, I can't answer that, that's when you get a lot of customer churn. People will leave. If it's too hard, they'll just go away. And how do you get high quality answers to the person that's coming in at 2 a.m. to a question you'd never heard before? This is the solution of how you do that. Now, we talked a little bit before about knowledge workers, right? And so as I talk with a lot of these large companies around the world about how they're going to step into this new era that we're coming to of, AI is huge, it's big. They know their organizations are going to change in terms of makeup, what they're doing. They're not going to spend so much time directly answering questions. They're going to spend much more time building better content, which is a higher value job than the person answering the phone and reciting the thing coming off the documentation, right? It's the next level up. So turning those folks into knowledge workers and not just customer support people. And so analytics is where that comes in. So we automatically categorize across different product lines, different service lines. You set up the categories that you want. We'll automatically bucket intents into those. So it makes it easy for larger teams to direct the questions that are relevant to that team or product line to the right bucket. So in this case, I've set up one category called Watson products and another one called other. You could set up multiple categories. You get a 15 or 20. And that way, the questions that are off the wall all end up in other, and then everything else is nicely categorized by the product at hand. Now, in here, you'll see two different metrics. One is coverage, meaning how many documents or snippets of documents do I have that talk about the subject matter area? And then confidence of how well do I think I did at actually answering that question? If you remember back to that semantic score that we had of saying, okay, here's the question that was asked. Is it backed by fact in the corporate knowledge base? So I, as a content management owner, right, I can quickly scan down and say, where do we have problems right now? And I can say, okay, well, let me look at this question. What did the person actually ask? And so the question at hand was, what are the costs associated with IBM Watson? And I know, because I'm the content owner, that the IBM page for Watson doesn't mention really any costs. So then we as a business decide, okay, people are asking this question. Do we want to answer it directly on the web page, or how do we want to handle questions like this? And you can go back and update the source and more directly answer people's questions, providing better information, or say, hey, this is something that we want to keep this way. We need to direct them down the funnel to a salesperson if they ask that question, right? But it arms you with the information to do so. And this analytics page changes over time. So you can have a look back period of saying, okay, well, what has changed in the questions? Do I have new questions that are popping in? And you can see right here, about 10 or 15 days ago, a bunch of new questions popped in, and I got a new hit on Watson X, which was a product that IBM announced about a week and a half ago. That is the new large language model foundation platform that they're about to release. And questions came in. And in this case, I had some of them with decently low confidence. So again, I, as a content owner, would be able to be armed with this information and say, hey, let's generate more content around this because people are asking questions. We want this up in the green. And it's easy inside of the Curate tab here to go and make sure that you are editing for follow-on these questions. The team can take notes about why they changed things, why they updated an edited answer. You can flag for follow-on, right? You can do all of these components. But the intent here is to be able to utilize whatever falls through into NeuralSeek to automatically generate a virtual agent, right? So just by selecting the questions that I think I care about, I can automatically export these directly into a load file to take up and create a virtual agent with no effort, right? So I'm going to modify a setting here. Right now, this is set to build to what's called dialogues inside of Watson Assistant. I'm going to set it to build to actions. So on the configure tab, it's just as easy as saying what platform I want to build to and then saving that. And then from here, I can select the questions that I care about and export them directly. Now, the other thing that you could see sometimes in here is there may be questions that come across that are better suited towards a conversation. So if I come in and I ask a question, I'd like to purchase a subscription at Cognos. Cognos is an IBM BI tool, right? And this is a question that probably is not suitable towards a direct answer, right? It's more of an interactive, like, what do you want to subscribe to, that sort of thing. The system will automatically flag in instances where it thinks that the question would be better served towards a conversation. There's a model that runs that looks and says, hey, you could probably do better than this, right? So we've got the answer that came through, and then we automatically turn this into a multi-turn conversation, essentially creating a template for anything. And again, this can be directly exported as well into the virtual agent, saving tons of time up front from having to do these sort of things, right? So I can just export that. And then when I come back into Watson Assistant, I can say, okay, well, here's where I am. Let me create a new assistant here real quick. So I'll call it test. And from this point, all I have to do is load up that load file that I just generated. And the whole build of the virtual agent then is done for me automatically, right? I come in, I've got all of the questions that I asked. I've got the multi-turn conversation that was already built. So you can just imagine the amount of time it would have taken to just come into all of these areas, added all of the training phrases, added all of the multiple answers that we did here. We just saved hours, if not a week or more of time of building all of this. And at this point, because NeuralSeek had created that answer, it knows where the answer came from, right? So if we remember back on the Seek tab over here, the sources that we found these things from, we take a hash of those, meaning that we take a mathematical vector of where did this source come from, and we store that so that over time, as we know that an intent is being used up inside the virtual agent, we can monitor that source. We'll periodically recheck it, and we'll see, did the sources, were they updated? Like, do I compute a different hash this time I look for that thing? If we do, we know that the source documentation has changed, meaning that we now have an isolated pocket of information up inside of that virtual agent. We've got potentially a wrong answer that's hidden inside that bot somewhere. We can automatically alert to that. We'll tell you exactly where it's sitting, and we'll even offer to regenerate that for you automatically. So it really takes a big amount of work off of the maintenance and worry of, once you've put out a virtual agent, do I have to spend tons of time having somebody click on each one of these things, read through the answers that are here, understand that something is different now without having to go ask Bob down the hall what the new answer is, and then making that change, because that could be mind-bogglingly difficult for a large organization. Take for us example, right? Like we typically, in the virtual agents that we'll build, have anywhere between 100 and 150 intents, right? So topic areas that we talk about, and dozens of dialogue nodes underneath each one of those. It could be a massive undertaking to have to look through all of that stuff to find where the wrong information sits. We eliminate all that worry. And so this is really why these solutions make financial sense, is because you offload all of that busy work, right? All of that low level, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to click on something and read through it, right? But it does take a lot of effort to understand what the real answer should be. You shift all of that time and effort to saying, just focus on building better content. And we're going to tell you exactly where you need to build that better content. Here's where it is, right? So it's a completely shift of paradigm around customer care and the focus there, saving a lot of time and money, and then generally elevating the experience, right? Because as you saw in the beginning of the demo, we're able to have a much more rich and interactive experience with the end customer. They can ask a question in complete natural language and get a coherent answer back without me having to spend countless hours up front guessing what they might ask me and then creating those answers to begin with. I can just let them ask. I can then look to see what they did ask and say, hey, that's a great question. We should formalize that, and completely work backwards.
We've had some questions come in.
Yeah, let's have them.
Now's a good time to address. So one was, how can NeuralSeek connect with data stored in a CSV? And can you talk about table understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a feature that we launched pretty recently. So CSVs and table understanding are slightly different answers. So I'm going to talk to both of them, right? So table understanding, typically when we see this, we've got corporate knowledge stuck in a Word doc or PDF that's got embedded tables inside the pages, that the pages talk to the table. The table's in there in some sort of fancy format, but a lot of the real meat of the document is locked inside of these tables. So we have a setting inside of NeuralSeek that allows you to do pre-processing automatically on documents like that, unpacking them and essentially turning the table itself into conversational friendly format. So then you can ask specific deep questions about it. So it's a pre-processing that runs, uses generative AI, turns that into a focused set of statements, essentially, that the generative AI would then fall back to. So you can automatically unpack things like that. We've got some large global systems integrators in India that are using this today.
Great. And I think we have a follow-up question to that as well, would be how long are the intent groups kept in the curate tab? And in this case, they have a lot of intents in analytic that don't lead to anything in curate if you click on them. You may have to take this one offline.
Yeah, so basically you would find that if you have things in analytics that don't lead to things in curate, most likely you either have PII on the input, right? And we're hiding the actual source of where they came from. So let me talk about PII for a second. So NeuralSeek automatically looks for PII on the input. And if it flags it, it does one of multiple options, right? So we can either flag the PII for follow-on, we can mask it in place, we could hide it from the UI so that you can't actually have a knowledge worker look at it, or we could automatically delete it, right? So in this system, I have it set for mask, right? So if I came in and I asked a question like this, and I said, yeah. And I spill a bunch of my PII onto this. When I have it set to mask, we're going to expect the system to automatically identify that I've left my name and my information on here, dynamically mask that stuff so it's not spilling everywhere. Or if I had the other settings set, I could automatically delete it. So here's the answers that came in. We flag it for PII in this case. We masked, it found Garrett, and it found the ID that I put in, and it got rid of it. Now, if you have the system set up to hide it, essentially you would see analytics on withholding, right? It's probably popped up over here. And you would see, okay, but when I clicked on, well, where did that come from? You would see nothing because it was then hidden. So hopefully that helped answer that. But again, there's a few different reasons why you might see things on analytics and not on curate, but that's one of them.
Great. And another question that popped up was around if source documentation changes, but you've previously exported a conversation into Watson Assistant, would you get flagged in NeuralSeek to update that conversation?
Yes, so it doesn't matter the thing. It could either be a direct answer or it could be the conversation. But basically, if you have hooked up Watson Assistant to the Watson Logs endpoint, meaning that you've gone inside of Assistant and made the connection, every turn of the conversation that matches an intent that came from NeuralSeek will be logged back into the system. And periodically, meaning at least once a day, NeuralSeek will look back at the source, compute the hash again, and see if it changed. And if so, it will alert you. Doesn't matter conversation to answer.
You've currently answered all of the outstanding questions at this point.
Perfect. So then let's go back to the deck, because there's some things that are easier to talk about than sometimes show. So we talked a little bit about trustworthy AI, right? So we showed in the Seek tab the ability to expose answer provenance, where those things came from. We talked a little bit about semantic match scoring, but that's, again, one of the really critical pieces that we bring to the table here, being able to say, here is where the answer comes from. And also, here's how we score it on the quality of the match we had back into the original source documentation. This is the main thing that separates us from, like, well, why didn't you just ask ChatGPT that? Well, it's because I have no idea what's behind the scenes of ChatGPT, where it's getting the answers from, or if they're going to be topical to trust with my business branding, right? But if I am running through the semantic match score, I am. So one of the things that we do is we have an out-of-the-box model that we provide. We also allow you to bring your own large language model. And so this is something that we're starting on right now, where we've got support for a handful of large language models with a lot more on the way. So we'll be at launch time of IBM Watson X, we will be a partner of them, allowing you to select Watson X and Watson X models directly from the console and use a Watson X large language model, and it will be governed by our transparency of AI, meaning it'll work exactly the same way. We'll show you where that language model pieced together its answer, provide the full transparency to it. So it'll allow you to really easily switch between models and potentially dynamically switch them, depending on if you're building or if you're running, helping you to maintain a lower cost of runtime and ownership for the whole solution. We talked about dynamic personalization. So again, this is something that we bring to the table that's very easy to use, but very powerful for creating answers that have a deeper connection with users. We talked a lot about content analytics. So again, shifting the focus of what we intend to do now with the resources and the time that we free up, because, hey, we're automatically building these things that used to take weeks or months to build and finesse. Well, now we've got a lot of time with these people, have them again focus on a higher level task, building better documentation.
And Garrett, as you're talking about contents, we did have two questions come in related to documentation. The first one is, can NeuralSeek work with PDFs and tables in PDFs as well?
Yes, so that's exactly what we launched with the table understanding feature. So inside of NeuralSeek, all you do is you enable table understanding. We'll pre-process specifically those documents that have embedded tables, turn them into a format that is much better formatted for language generation, and be able to answer very complicated questions about very complicated tables.
Right. And then the other question is it possible to send images or tables captured from documentation?
So for some of these things, there are going to be limitations of the selected document, like knowledge base underneath us, right? So today, NeuralSeek utilizes Lucene-based indexes as our knowledge base stores. So typically, Watson Discovery or Elasticsearch are going to be the two main. Discovery has more capability than Elasticsearch around doing automatic OCR on images, but we would be dependent on them to do the upfront OCR. There's no OCR component directly built in NeuralSeek.
And one additional question, is it possible or is there a plan to integrate with other cloud providers?
Yes. So we are going live with AWS tomorrow, and then Azure will be next.
One more currently came in. If we currently have IBM Watson, will they be upgrading our platforms to Watson X? And can our assistants upgrade with X without being rebuilt?
So you connect to Watson X through our bring your own large language model plan. Now, within the plans that the specific IBMers are using, they're using our Lite plan, which currently uses our curated model. We will be assessing once Watson X goes live and IBMers specifically have access to Watson X, to pushing all of the IBMers to using essentially only Watson X as the backing LLM for NeuralSeek.
I think maybe Watson X being as new as it is, I think we're still investigating what exactly that will look like. But the platforms will work together to kind of directly answer the question. And then yeah, if you're talking just the large language model, it's kind of TBD, and depending on what your organization requirements are.
Yeah, so it's important to know what Watson X is and what it isn't. So first of all, NeuralSeek is a platform for accelerating the business use of large language models. So we're not a large language model. We consume large language models, and we automatically build and automatically maintain virtual agents. That's what NeuralSeek does. Watson X is a platform for building and running large language models. So the two work in harmony together. Watson X can't build a virtual agent. Watson X doesn't necessarily provide for the transparency of AI. It doesn't directly connect to knowledge bases. It just allows you to run an LLM. So yes, the two of them work in concert. So tomorrow, instead of our curated model, you could select to use Watson X as your LLM. You could select to use Azure as your LLM. There'll be lots of different options. And from a large language model perspective, the cost of large language models and the runtime is going to continue to drop dramatically over the next 6 to 12 months.
I think that explanation definitely helped me, so thank you.
Mm-hmm. We talked a little about customer protection, right? So dynamically finding PII on input, and in most cases, most companies just want to get rid of it, not even bother with masking or flagging. They just automatically delete it. And then automatically checking sentiment. So it's another big thing in customer care. If a question comes in and it flows to an intent that I don't have controlled, it's very useful to have automatic sentiment monitoring around that. So not only can I answer the question, but I can use that to dynamically drive the person to an agent if I wanted to. Talked a little bit about self-building virtual agents and self-building conversations. Again, two features that are live today that allow for really reducing the build time around these. Essentially, we can create a conversation for anything. We utilize whatever documentation you have on the subject matter, automatically generate that content based on it. And indeed, we can allow for the bootstrapping, right? So starting up a virtual agent can be minutes. So typically we'll have somebody come in with limited to no experience, be able to drive to a basic virtual agent that answers in-depth Q&A in about 10 minutes, right? So the way that works, we have an onboarding mechanism inside of NeuralSeek. It walks you through the basics. It helps you connect to your knowledge base, doing a test down of that, understanding the information that's inside of there, generating, if I had nothing here, it could generate a summary of what my company is. I could tune it towards my use case, but then being able to go down and automatically, I can generate questions. So I can ask the system, say, hey, look at my documentation and you guess for me what you think the top 20 questions are going to be that I might ask. And then, oh, by the way, once you figure out what the questions are, go answer those for me. Take all of the workload off my plate and just do it. And so by doing this, you flow through the onboarding screen, you can get a virtual agent up and running in about 10 minutes, which is just night and day different to what it was a year ago, right? So you can see that, yeah, we actually looked down into the scrape of the website that we pulled for this. It knows a lot about IBM Z, Linux One, and we can drive answers to these questions. All I do is whack submit. It's going to go out, form all the answers for those. 3 or 4 minutes, come back and say, hey, here's your load file for your virtual agent. You're done. So very flexible, very fast. What other questions do you have?
Let's see, we have any advice regarding removing the stump speech from every message?
Yeah,
I've tried editing lots of outputs to remove it, but it persists.
Yeah, it's one single setting. So inside of company organization preferences, say do not add affinity, and then you're done.
What types of analysis can NeuralSeek do on CSV data through Watson Discovery?
Now, that's a complicated question because it really depends on how you brought the CSV into Discovery. Knowing that Discovery manipulates CSVs differently, right? So if you bring the CSV in as raw text, it may work better because by default, if you bring the CSV into Discovery, Discovery itself is going to take every single row of that CSV and dump it into a different document, right? Which may be good and may be bad. Additionally, depending on how you have Discovery set, it could take every column inside of that CSV and dump it to a different JSON field in the backing, essentially separating all of that information out. So it's very hard to piece back together. Generally, for most use cases, we avoid trying to do CSVs, and we'll take the CSV and we'll make it into another document style, either a JSON, and we'll combine things together ourselves, turn it into a normal text document or Word, just because of what Discovery does to the data is not necessarily useful from a generative AI side. But we can talk offline of ways to mitigate it if you have to use a CSV. But generally, CSVs are not great.
Another question came in here. When an answer is being curated, the hyperlink will lead to the homepage, but no longer the data source. Is there a way to save the link with the answers?
So let's look, right? So if I have an answer that is curated, so let's take one of these. So this is one that came in through the automatic question generator, right? So I've never asked this question before. So let's look right now first. I'm going to open up another tab here on Seek, and we'll see where it grabbed this from. Okay, so it got back, what is virtualization? So let's go turn this into an edited answer. I'll just remove the affinity. Perfect. So now I should have one edited answer and then one normal answer. Yeah. And so let's go back in over here. I'll clear the context. I'm going to ask the question again. So because I have right now the system set up to automatically default to giving the edited answer if one exists. And let me show you in the settings where that is. So in configure, in cache configuration, there are two answer caches that allow for the system to answer exactly and fast. There's the edited answer cache and there's the normal answer cache. So what this one is setting up to say, right now, if I have one or more edited answer and I have a Levenstein distance match from the user question into the answer, give the edited answer back exactly and don't do anything else, right? Give it back to me sub-second time. The other one is if I have, in this case, the setting is more than 5 times I've answered and the backing information, meaning that the hashes of where that question came from have not changed. And I have an exact match word for word, including the history of where I came from in that question, meaning the question that happened before and before that, then again, answer from the cache. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump this up edit answer cache to 4. And so now we're going to expect the language, us to not directly answer the edited answer from cache, and it's going to go out to language generation. So again, I'll refresh, I'll come in. This one's going to go out and search the knowledge base and again, give me the URL. So the only time it wouldn't is if you set the system to answer an edited only answer specifically from cache. I hope that helps. And it does that because basically I'm giving you the edited answer before it ever goes to look inside of the knowledge base. And you can turn that off entirely if you don't want it just by setting disabled. Other questions?
Can NeuralSeek answer questions directly on the chat screen, or does it just handle the answers for Watson Assistant to answer later?
About half of our customers today use us directly via API and not via Watson Assistant. So yes, this is all API driven. You can put this bar exactly onto any web page you wanted. You don't have to use a virtual agent.
See, thanks for your help. We'll definitely try out some of the things you suggested. I guess a follow-up around the CSV, and maybe we do want to schedule a follow-up, is would translating CSV directly to PDF Word be sufficient, or would it make NeuralSeek more powerful to add some supplementary descriptions, summaries on the data?
It'll always be better if you add conversational words to things in a CSV, right? So some CSVs may just be paragraphs that somebody's dumped into a CSV, then those will work fine. But if it's just, single word or numeric in the CSV, a lot of times I, as a human, will look at that and I'll have no idea what the CSV is talking about. So if you can't look at the CSV and immediately say, I understand what this is saying and it makes logical sense, there's probably limited chance that language generation is going to be able to understand it. With all of these things, right? Again, the whole intent behind NeuralSeek and these solutions is to free up people's time to make better documentation. And that comes in making your documentation into a format and content that lends itself towards better answer generation, right? So it's definitely the wrong approach to try to say, let me try to engineer a way into using the world's most horrific document to answer questions, because you may spend 100 hours trying to solve for using this horrible document when you could spend 30 minutes to making a better document, right? So that is the path forward.
Any other questions? There we go. Would it ever be possible for NeuralSeek to target multiple collections or projects in discovery so that a different question could be routed to a different knowledge base? Also, would it be possible to do the same thing except for different large language models in the future?
So maybe and yes. So today, the system automatically goes across all collections. So collections aren't necessarily a firewall. If you have a project in discovery, we will go across all collections. From a project perspective, right? If I were to go over to discovery, right? It's basically a combination of service URL, project ID, and API key that determines an endpoint for discovery. So we could theoretically in the future talk across multiple projects, but it's hard for me to piece together the use case of why you would want to go against two, right? Knowing that there is a time penalty that comes to any discovery query. Typically from discovery, if you're using a SaaS version of discovery, it's a 4 to 5 second time penalty for going out and asking it. You'd have to weigh that to why you would want to go against multiple, right? From a large language model perspective, yes, absolutely, we'll be offering the ability to do multiple large language models. So today, I'm just going to go into a sample. In the bring your own large language model version, you can dial in what large language model you want. And so, next week timeframe, Watson X will be in this drop-down list. All of this is driven by API. So I, as a user, could come in and say, hey, I want to use this one. Or by API, per call, I could theoretically use a different model if I wanted to. So we have customers using the BYO LLM today, but they'll use GPT-4 to do the bootstrapping, right? So they'll create all of their initial answers using GPT-4, probably the best model out there today, to generate really rich, nice answers. Then they'll come in and they'll turn on their answer cache, right? So to be something pretty low, so that when somebody asks a question that matches something that they've generated in GPT-4, serve that answer. If not, they'll have turned on the lesser model, GPT-3.5, so that additional things will flow in real time to 3.5. And that's because of the big time difference in running those models. GPT-3.5 will typically run 2 to 4 seconds. GPT-4, 30 to 60 seconds, depending on what you're sending to it and the time of day, right? So not useful for real time, but great for bootstrapping an instance. Maybe another question came in.
Yes. An example of a multiple discovery project scenario. In Watson Assistant, there would be 2 actions that recognize you were asking about different topics and then use NeuralSeek that is targeting different discovery projects.
Today, we would just do that together with 2 instances of NeuralSeek, right? So you'd have each one targeting a different NeuralSeek. We do that today.
But thank you very much. Well done.
Any additional questions?
I don't think we have anything else coming in.
Awesome. Well, I hope that was informative for you. Again, feel free to reach out with any questions that you have about this, where we're going. In the coming months, we'll be rolling out a bunch new features for NeuralSeek. Again, with the intent of making the overall experience better and easier for people, allowing more choice in platform, right? More choice in model, so that no matter how large an organization, from the smallest mom and pop business around the corner to a global multinational company, they'll be able to get almost immediate use out of it using the platforms, the knowledge bases, the large language models that they choose. We are the no-code solution for bringing these things together to quickly be able to utilize them and gain value from it, right? We're the focus area for how can you make more time in the day? And then what do I do with that time that I made, right? So free up people from answering questions that could be automatically answered, and then get them to make better documentation. All right, Brian, did you have any follow-ons, or how does the lunch part of the Lunch and Learn work?
Great question. So no, I don't have any follow-ons. Thanks so much for digging into NeuralSeek, walking through current capabilities, future capabilities. In terms of the Lunch and Learn side of it, the learning part is now complete, and you should have received an email with a like a gift card essentially to use. It should have came in, I think, via Uber was, I think, the subject. So if you have any questions as it relates to utilizing that, please feel free to reach out. But you can use a local restaurant, something that you're familiar with that's available on that platform. So thanks so much for everyone's time. Garrett, thanks for walking through this.
Awesome. I appreciate all your time as well. Have a great day, everyone.